You were 7, maybe 8, and you walked into that room holding a piece of paper crumpled at the corners, covered in color and hope, a drawing, a small universe your hands had made. You held it up like it was sacred, like it was proof that you mattered. But they didn't look, or worse, they looked, then laughed, or gave you that tight-lipped smile adults give when they want you to go away. And something inside you collapsed. Not loudly, not with tears, but with silence. You tucked the paper behind your back. You learned in that moment that expression is exposure, that joy is dangerous, that the parts of you that shine too brightly get dimmed by people who cannot see. So you stopped offering. You stopped raising your hand. You stopped walking into rooms with your chest open and your soul curious. And from that silence, a story began to form. A story that said, who I am is too much. Who I am is not enough. Who I am must be managed. Now fast forward. You're not 8 anymore. You're 30 or 40 or somewhere in between. You've built a life. You've survived things most people never will. You show up. You try. You give. But something still feels off. You over-apologize. You downplay your needs. You keep attracting people who overlook you, interrupt you, or misuse your loyalty. And when it all falls apart, you whisper to yourself, what's wrong with me? But what if there's nothing wrong with you? What if you're not broken, you're just trapped? Not by your choices, not by your nature, but by a memory. A memory so old, it lives not in your head but in your nervous system. In the tension in your shoulders when someone raises their voice. In the way your voice gets quieter when you speak about what you want. In the way you flinch not with your body, but with your spirit every time someone asks you to be seen. Because healing isn't always about doing more. Sometimes, it's about remembering who you were before you forgot your worth. It's about walking back to that moment, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not unlovable. You are carrying a wound that was never acknowledged. You are running software written by a child trying to survive. And until that child is held, you will keep mistaking safety for love and silence for peace. When did you start calling your defense mechanisms who I am? They said, be a good boy. Don't make a fuss. Say thank you even if you didn't like it. Don't talk back. Smile. And you did. You followed the script. You became polite, agreeable, safe. But what you didn't realize was, every time you obeyed without understanding, you lost a piece of yourself. Because they weren't raising a man. They were manufacturing obedience. They were grooming you to fit in, not to stand out. To be liked, not to be free. You were programmed to feel guilt anytime you said no. To feel shame anytime you wanted more. To flinch at the sound of your own truth, because it might offend someone. And it worked. You became easy to manage, easy to overlook, easy to use. Because that's the goal of this system. Not to make you wise, but to make you convenient. Not to make you conscious, but to make you quiet. You were never taught how to hold your anger with clarity. You were taught to bury it. You were never shown how to sit in discomfort and ask questions. You were told to behave. The system doesn't fear your pain. It fears your awakening. And what's worse, you internalize the programming. So now when you feel sad, you say, maybe I'm just too emotional. When you feel angry, you say, I shouldn't feel this way. When you feel tired, you say, I'm being lazy. When you feel numb, you say, there's something wrong with me. But there isn't. You were not born with these labels. They were installed. They handed you masks. Nice, harmless, selfless. And they rewarded you every time you wore them. But at what cost? You learned to love in ways that made you invisible. You learned to care in ways that made you expendable. You learned to show up for others in ways that erased you. And they called it virtue. But that's not virtue. That's programming. Real virtu requires consciousness. Real compassion requires boundaries. Real love begins with the ability to say, "This is who I am, with or without your approval." So here's the truth. You were never broken. You were just trained to believe you were. You don't need fixing. You need the programming. Because under all the masks, all the shame, all the guilt, is a man who remembers who he was before they told him who to be. Mirror question. What belief have you carried that kept you powerless? Every relationship is a transaction, not in the cold, manipulative sense, but in the fundamental truth that everything emotional has value. And the tragedy is this. You were taught to give everything for free. Your time, your attention, your loyalty, your forgiveness, without boundaries, without questions, without return, because they told you, good men don't expect anything. Real love is unconditional. If you give enough, they'll stay. But no one told you this. Unconditional giving becomes emotional slavery when it's not mutual. You thought that if you were good enough, kind enough, patient enough, they would finally see you. They would finally love you. They would finally stop leaving. But they didn't. Because in the economics of emotion, he who needs least holds the most power. You were taught to believe that needing nothing made you noble. But in truth, it just made you silent. And silence gets overlooked. It gets misunderstood. It gets used. Because here's the hard truth. People value what costs them something, what they have to reach for, what they have to grow to meet. But when you give it all up front, your presence, your vulnerability, your soul, you train them to expect it, not cherish it. And when they take it, and you're left feeling empty, you tell yourself, maybe I wasn't enough. You were too much given to the wrong context, to people who didn't have the capacity to reciprocate. Because love, at its core, is not just an emotion. It is an energetic balance. It's supply and demand. It's respect and return. And when that balance is broken, what follows is resentment, exhaustion, collapse. So ask yourself, where in your life have you been leaking power, calling it love? Where have you been giving, hoping they'll just get it, without ever requiring that they actually show up? Because power doesn't mean domination. It means discernment. It means choice. It means you decide who gets access, and at what cost. You're not broken. You've just been emotionally bankrupt, from giving to systems that were never built to refill you. And now, it's time to restructure the terms. Mirror question. Where in life have you traded power for peace? You kept showing up. Every time they forgot you, you forgave. Every time they crossed a line, you redrew it further back. Every time they left, you waited. Because that's what nice guys do, right? They don't rock the boat. They don't make demands. They don't ask for more than what's offered even when it's nothing. But somewhere along the way, you started to disappear. Not all at once. Not in flames. But in pieces. Your opinion got kitty. Your smile got faker. Your wants got buried under theirs. You became agreeable to the point of invisibility. And the worst part? They didn't even notice. Because no one misses what blends into the background. No one respects what doesn't require anything. You became predictable, safe, easy. And in doing so, you became disposable. That's the collapse no one talks about. The collapse of the nice guy. It's not dramatic. It's not explosive. It's silent. It's when you're in a room full of people and feel completely alone. It's when you do everything right in a relationship and still get left. It's when you spend your whole life being good and still feel unseen. And the world tells you, try harder, be nicer, stay soft. But you've already given everything soft you had. And they still walked over it. You were told that love is earned through sacrifice. But the truth is, sacrifice without recognition becomes self-erasure. And here's the twist. They don't leave because you're not enough. They leave because there's nothing to chase, nothing to push against. No fire, no gravity, no edge. You became a mirror for their comfort. but not a man they needed to rise for. Because true connection requires polarity, friction, mystery, standards, not compliance. So when they left, you didn't just lose them. You lost your story. You lost the script that told you being nice would finally make you matter. But maybe that's where something real begins. Because when the mask of the nice guy falls, you don't collapse. You wake up. You see the boy inside you, the one who was told to be good at all costs. And you realize goodness without self-respect is just a performance. And the show is over. Mirror question. Who stopped valuing you the moment you became predictable? It doesn't start with a scream. It starts with silence. One day, something shifts. You wake up, and you don't reach for your phone. You sit in the quiet, and you don't fill it. You walk past the people who once drained you, and you don't smile. Not because you're angry, but because something inside you has closed. Not in bitterness. In clarity, this is not the collapse. This is the rebellion, but not the kind you see in movies. There's no shouting, no smashing, no revenge. Just a man who begins to withhold what he used to give away for free. His attention, his energy, his explanations. You stop proving. You stop chasing. You stop negotiating with people who only love the version of you that needed them. You don't explain your silence. You let it echo, because now you understand. The deepest form of power is stillness. Not apathy, not retreat, but presence stripped of the need to please. And this shakes people. They don't know what to do with a man who no longer needs validation, who no longer responds on cue, who no longer plays the emotional butler in their lives. You used to be a soft place for everyone to land. Now, you're a mirror, and not everyone can look into it. Your silence will disturb those who fed on your noise. Epictetus, they'll say, you've changed, that you've grown cold, that you're distant. But what really happened is, you stopped leaking. You stopped explaining your soul to people who were committed to misunderstanding it. You stopped overcompensating for others' lack of effort. You stopped burning yourself down to keep their world warm. And what rose from the ashes wasn't bitterness, it was standards. You now understand. You were never too much. You were just in rooms that asked you to shrink. And you're done shrinking. The inner rebellion is not loud because it doesn't need to be. It's a man walking out of the role he was given and writing a new script with no applause in mind. You let go of the idea that love must be earned. You let go of the story that says your value is in your utility. You let go of the fear that if you don't give endlessly, you'll be abandoned, because you'd rather be alone in your truth than adored in your silence. You are not broken. You are remembering. And remembrance is rebellion in a world that profits from your forgetting. So stop apologizing for waking up. Stop softening your edges for people who only liked you dull. Stop fearing the distance your standards create. It's not loneliness. It's sovereignty. Mirror question. What happens when you stop proving and start observing? You're not cold. You're clear. But they'll say you're distant, that you've hardened, that you're no longer the same. Because they were used to a version of you that bled without boundaries. The man who answered every call, even when he was breaking. The man who smiled when he wanted to scream. The man who made space for everyone, except himself. But now you're quiet. Not because you're bitter, because you've learned. You've learned that presence is not owed. That kindness without discernment is exploitation. That warmth without direction burns you down. So you chose distance, not out of hatred, but out of respect for yourself. Because real emotional discipline isn't about being numb. It's about knowing when to engage and when to let go. It's about recognizing that your energy is currency, and not everyone deserves access. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. They told you silence was passive aggression. They told you detachment was indifference. They told you boundaries were selfish. They were wrong. You don't stop caring. You stop leaking. There's a difference. When you stop answering texts that carry guilt, When you no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding. When you stop showing up out of obligation and start choosing alignment. You are not being cruel. You are being whole. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't react to everything. It means you don't perform your pain to be seen. It means you don't need to be understood to be valid. You become your own anchor, and the world will shake, because now it can't pull you. This discipline, this silence, this distance, it is the greatest act of healing, because for the first time, you are no longer managing others' emotions at the expense of your own. You are no longer drowning in approval addiction. You are no longer confusing availability with love. You are becoming sovereign. And that scares people who thrived on your compliance. But let them be uncomfortable. Let them call it cold. Because finally, you're warm to yourself. Mirror question. When was distance the kindest choice you made? They noticed, but too late. At first, they didn't react. They assumed your silence was just another phase. That you'd come back. That the man who always forgave, always bent, always stayed, would return. But you didn't. And now, the absence echoes louder than your presence ever did. They scroll through old messages and see your name untouched. They reach out and feel the cold space you used to fill with warmth. They talk about you in past tense, but secretly hope for a future chance. Because here's the thing they never understood. You were never too much. You were just too available. They didn't leave because you were broken. They left because they didn't believe you ever would. And now that you did, everything feels unfamiliar, because you're not chasing anymore. You're not explaining. You're not offering the same soft place to land. You've become rare, not because you changed your heart, but because you finally valued it. And when a man values himself, the entire system around him trembles. They used to control you with guilt. Now it doesn't work. They used to manipulate with silence. Now you match it with peace. They used to test your limits, but now you have walls, and they don't know how to climb them. Because for once, the door is closed and locked. You were the constant, the comfort, the fallback plan. And now, you're gone. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in evolution. Your absence will haunt them more than your presence ever moved them. The echo isn't in your words. It's in the space they thought they owned, and now must face alone. It's in the quiet dinners where they reach for their phone and realize you're not there. It's in the conversations where they almost say your name, but swallow it instead. Because the truth is, they respected you most when you withdrew. They saw your worth when it was missing. They recognized your value only when it stopped being free. This is the echo, not of noise, but of standards. It's not vengeance. It's justice. Not punishment, but balance. You're not cruel for leaving. You're honest. You're not heartless for moving on. You're healthy. And they will either rise to meet the man you've become, or disappear into the silence they once demanded. But you won't be waiting. Because you finally understand, love doesn't beg. It attracts. And you've become the gravity they can no longer reach. Mirror question. Who noticed your worth only after you walked away? He doesn't chase. Not because he's arrogant, but because he's found himself. He doesn't explain anymore. Not because he's bitter, but because he's at peace. The man who used to beg for closeness, who used to twist himself to be liked, who once believed that being understood was love, is gone. What remains is someone different. A man who can walk away without slamming the door. A man who can feel deeply without needing a witness. A man who can stand in silence and still be whole. He no longer needs to be seen because he sees himself. This is the final realization. You were never broken. You were just trapped in a memory. A memory of childhood wounds. A memory of being told you were only lovable if you were useful. A memory of being needed, not known. But you don't live there anymore. You've returned to the present, to your power, to your boundaries, to your worth. And it doesn't look loud. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like discipline. It looks like saying no without guilt. It looks like choosing solitude over performance. It looks like walking away when your soul isn't met and not turning back. They'll say you've changed. But you didn't change. You remembered. You remembered who you were before the world taught you to earn love by erasing yourself. You remembered that your silence was never empty, it was sacred. Now, your life isn't about proving. It's about preserving, not about fixing yourself, but about refusing to shrink. This is who you are now. A man who loves without leaking. A man who walks without chasing. A man who leads without shouting. And most of all, a man who knows. The truly powerful man is the one who no longer needs to explain his silence. You're not broken. You're just done bleeding for people who mistook your depth for weakness. And the moment you stop trying to be understood is the moment you finally become free. Mirror question. What would happen if you let go of being understood and chose to just be?